Hello and welcome to the Derek Deputy Video Game Show. I'm your host, Derek Deputy. Today we're going to talk about the PlayStation Showcase. Slightly disappointing. We're going to talk about Nintendo going after Dolphin on Steam. Also slightly disappointing. And we're going to talk about Star Trek Resurgence. Unfortunately, also somewhat disappointing. Although I do still really enjoy the game. But first, if you are listening on YouTube, subscribe, please. It helps a lot. Like the video. That helps a lot. Comment with your thoughts on anything we talk about. Click the notifications. Make sure you catch future episodes. If you are listening on other podcasting platforms, Amazon Music or Spotify Podcasts or anything like that, they may have a follow button or subscribe button or something along those lines, and I think you should click it to make sure you catch future episodes. I try to upload an episode once per week. We're entering the busy season for video game news, so make sure you catch future episodes. If nothing else, just come back next week. There will probably be another episode. But let's get right into things. So first, the PlayStation Showcase. This big showcase we waited a year and a half, 2 years for, and it was slightly disappointing. There was some good stuff in it, but overall, there was more stuff missing than there was actually in it. For example, we did not get any The Last of Us multiplayer game news. According to Jason Schreier, the reason for that is because it's been scaled down. There were issues of some sort. The article doesn't get too specific, but we didn't see it at the showcase. Some things we did see was a new Sony handheld. Well, it's not really a handheld. It's not like the PSP. It's not the Vita 2 or anything like that. It is I want to say streaming device. Although that's not quite, that might be the right term. It pretty much is just going to stream the games you already have on PS5. It turns your PS5 on and works kind of like the Wii U gamepad. I think is the way I understand it, except you can take it on the go more. I don't completely understand how it works, but it's gonna play your PlayStation 5 games. That's what matters. It looks like a tablet with two ends of a PS5 controller on it. It looks kind of dumb, to be honest, and I think it's gonna be a little bit expensive. People are talking about the $200 to $250, maybe even $300 range, and that's just too much for what it is. Like, if it was like an actual handheld that could store games or whatever, maybe. But that price, no, for what it is. We also found out about Metal Gear Solid information. There is a Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, and they're re-releasing the original Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3, along with some Metal Gear games in the collection. I'm not sure about the MGS3 remake yet, but I'm definitely going to pick up that collection because I missed out on Metal Gear for the most part. I've played 5, Phantom Pain, and that's the only one I've played. I really, really enjoyed Phantom Pain. I got it for free on PlayStation Plus. Really enjoyed it. So now I'm going to play the others, and if I enjoy them, maybe I will pick up the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake. Some other highlights: Assassin's Creed Mirage, Alan Wake 2, Dragon's Dogma. There was Final Fantasy stuff, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. There was mostly stuff that I don't care too much about, to be honest. As far as the highlights go, I did find Fair Game $, I think was the name of the game. Interesting. From Jade Raymond. She used to work on the Assassin's Creed games. Started their own studio. And that game has some Watch Dogs vibes to it. And I like Watch Dogs. It has like some hacker vibes. It's kind of, it looks like it could be a live service game, and I'm not too big into those games generally, but if it's a free to play game, I'll probably be willing to give it a try. If it's not a free to play game, who knows? Maybe it'll be a PlayStation Plus game eventually or something. I don't know. Or it'll be cheap. I'd be willing to try it for cheap, but it's definitely not something I would try for full price. Something I would try for full price was the Plucky Squire, which looks amazing. This little indie game. It's shown up before, I think in a Devolver Digital presentation, because it is a Devolver Digital game. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of it when they have their presentation this year. That game looks very good. A game that doesn't look very good is Foam Stars. It's Square Enix has said, hey, we have Splatoon at home. The developers of The Avengers, Forspoken, Balan Wonderland, The Quiet Man, bringing you Splatoon at home. And then, of course, they ended it out with Spider-Man 2. And that game looks so good. A lot of people are complaining that it's just more Spider-Man. And that's something I'm also going to talk about more later. But I think it looks good. I'm excited for the Venom suit abilities. I'm excited for gliding through the air. I just think it looks great. Some stuff that came out afterwards was that the Snitch reported that Sony has multiple game announcements that was not there for some reason. They don't know why. Tom Henderson also said something similar. Multiple announcements that didn't show up, not sure why. And also gave a report on the battery life of the handheld. So there was a lot of news about it afterwards. Overall, I thought the presentation was slightly disappointing. There was a few good things, a few highlights that I'm glad were there. But I think most people were expecting way more, given that it's been like 2 years since we've had a presentation. So hopefully we might get like another presentation at the end of this year or something. I don't know. But next, I want to talk about something completely different. I want to talk about Power Rangers Battle for the Grid. So Power Rangers Battle for the Grid is a fighting game that's a few years old at this point. I don't remember exactly when it came out. I remember I bought it when it came out, but it's a few years old at this point. And it stars different Power Rangers from different teams. It's almost like Mortal Kombat, except it's like a mix when it comes to controls, at least. Except it's also a team fighter, so it's kind of like Marvel vs. Capcom in that way. That's the best way I can explain it. It was very fun. And in a year where there's a lot of fighting games coming out, I just wanted to talk about an older fighting game that I enjoyed. It had a story mode. The story mode, if I remember right, did not launch at release of the game. But it came later. A complaint when the game launched was that there wasn't enough characters. They kept adding more characters, and now you can even buy the game physically, I think, with like all the characters for like $30 or $40, which is a really good deal for what that game is. It had a bunch of arcade modes, like different arcade modes for each character, kind of like a Mortal Kombat game. And the competitive play was influenced by top competitive fighting game players. So it was very good, very fun. It was a little bit glitchy at first. They had to have a few patches to fix some things. But looking back, it was a pretty fun game. And I was slightly disappointed, though, because the concept of a Power Rangers fighting game seems like something with, like, unlimited potential almost. And I don't think they quite reached the potential of what such a thing could be. More characters would have been good. I think instead of a budget game, which is what they made the game, they made it a budget game. And so that's why There wasn't a whole lot of characters at release. And there's more characters now, but it's still not the largest roster ever. And part of that has to do with it being like a budget game. And I think it was worth the money because it was only like $30 or something. Like, I think it was good for the price, but I definitely would have rather seen a full price game with Power Rangers as a fighting game and give a full price game of content. If they were to do another fighting game, I would hope it would kind of be more like Street Fighter 6 when it comes to the story mode and to the different single player options. And I would hope that they would have a much larger roster, maybe at least 1 or 2 Rangers from every team. They also had the original voice actors for a lot of it, so that was pretty cool at the time. But I have something else I want to talk about as well, so we'll get right to that. On Twitter the other day, the Pokemon Company shared that the Pokemon Home compatibility update, version 3.0.0 for Scarlet and Violet will be accessible. So Pokemon, for those who don't know, Pokemon Home is this, I don't want to call it a game, more like a program, available through the Switch and through mobile, that lets you connect your different Pokemon games together so that you can transfer your Pokemon from one game to another game, which is obviously quite handy to have. Until this moment, it was not available for Scarlet and Violet. So when this goes live, it will let people transfer Pokemon from Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, from Sword and Shield, from games that they transferred through Pokemon Bank from previous generations, from Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, from Legends Arceus, even from Pokemon Go, to Scarlet and Violet, which I think is great. I've been really looking forward to this update. Pokemon Home will be in maintenance from May 29th at 5 p.m. Pacific Time and could extend until May 30th, 11 p.m. Pacific Time. And to be honest, I don't think it will even be live for everyone. At that moment, I think it would be best to wait a week or so June 7th, to try this. But around that time, you should be able to transfer all your Pokemon to Scarlet and Violet. And it sounds like some Pokemon will even be able to transfer back afterwards. Looking at the infograph that was provided at one point, it looked, I don't know this for a fact, but it did look like, from a chart that was provided, that you'd be able to transfer Pokemon to Scarlet and Violet and then potentially transfer them back to the game that you got them on. So you could transfer something from Sword and Shield to Scarlet and Violet and vice versa, which, if that's true, seems like a pretty big deal. I'm excited. This will make filling up the Pokedex in Scarlet and Violet so much easier. I've been really looking forward to this update. I was kind of saving the Pokedex for this to make it a little bit easier. So I am very, very excited for this update. I love Pokemon Home. I love what it does for the Pokemon games. I like it much more than I liked Pokemon Bank. And I'm excited that it's going to be finally compatible with Scarlet and Violet, which I know people have mixed opinions on. Still kind of glitchy, still waiting on updates, but I generally enjoyed Scarlet and Violet. So I'm excited to go back, kind of start playing it again. Maybe. I have a pretty large list of games I need to play, so we'll see. But I'll probably go back and beat that and complete that Pokedex for that Shiny Charm. I'll definitely go back when the DLC releases, if nothing else. But we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back, I promise. Don't go away. If you do, pause and come back. The show will be back, I promise, in just a few. few seconds. no secret that Nintendo does not like emulation. This is pretty well known throughout the video game community as a whole. They're afraid of pirating, which, to be 100% fair, they have good reason to be afraid of pirating. While I think emulation is generally a good thing, there are a lot of people who do pirate Switch games. I've seen it personally. I know one or two people who have done exactly that. When it comes to older games, I kind of understand why people pirate. Nintendo isn't great about making their older stuff available on modern systems. So I kind of get it. It was not available on modern Nintendo systems, but I do think it's also kind of shitty that people pirate the games on the modern systems. I remember when Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee came out. I remember reading about someone I know making a big deal out of how they were going to just pirate those games. So with the Switch being so easy to emulate, I get why Nintendo is against emulation. But that's not really the story here. It's not what was going on. We're talking the Wii and GameCube. Because Dolphin, which is a emulator that's been around for like years and years at this point, and is like legitimately the best GameCube emulator. They were going to go to Steam. That way, it'd be easier to access Dolphin on the Steam Deck. As it is right now, you can already access it. But this would just make it easier. But Nintendo's legal team blocked the move. Specifically, Steam actually reached out to Nintendo, and Nintendo was like, "No, we don't like this." So Steam is not allowing it on their platform. This was at first reported as a DMCA, and it's not actually DMCA. Nintendo has told Valve, the company behind Steam, that they think it could go against DMCA laws. And Steam was like, okay, we'll get right on that. And so now Dolphin is not coming to Steam. It's kind of disappointing because it would have made GameCube games more accessible to a lot of people. And it's particularly disappointing because GameCube right now, the market for those on like the secondhand market, it's very high. It's very not good for people wanting to buy GameCube games, even if they have the hardware. And so emulation is the natural solution to for a lot of people, especially since Nintendo has not been great about the GameCube specifically. That is the system they've probably been the absolute worst about putting on Switch. They did get Metroid Prime Remaster on Switch, but it's not even an NSO system. Like, that's something you have to buy. Unlike N64, for example, or Super Nintendo. They're going to make you buy the GameCube games, which is like 20 years old at this point. And they're making people buy those games on Switch because, I don't know, they're 3D. I don't get it. I don't get why they consider that like their cutoff for not being something they can just add to NSO. It's weird. So I get why people want to emulate. If Nintendo's not going to make the games available, which they aren't, people should be able to play those on their Steam Deck, on their computer. This isn't going to stop anyone. Dolphin is still available on everything was available on before. All of this does is make it a little bit more annoying. And I just think it's kind of dumb. I get Nintendo doesn't like emulation, but I don't even think this is actually illegal. If Nintendo wants to stop piracy, the best way they can do it is, one, and make sure every first-party game from the NES to the Wii, including handhelds, is available on NSO. Secondly, they should port the remaining Wii U exclusive games. There's not many. And they should find a way to port 3DS games, the first party ones, to the Switch. Or if they want to make 3DS NSO, that might be easier. I don't know. The only reason I say Wii U shouldn't be on NSO is because they've already ported most of those anyway. And it is kind of... Those games are still kind of newish. I get 3DS you could probably get away with putting on NSO a little bit easier. Regardless, the third thing they should do if they want to stop piracy is to make sure there's at least like demos for all their first party Switch games. I remember when what was the name of that game called? What was that game called? There was that Switch game. I'm trying to remember the name. Astral Chain. That was the name. I remember when Astral Chain came out. That game looked relatively interesting to me. And I might have bought it if I could try it first. If they offered 1 hour demos, I think more people, even if it was just NSO members, I think more people would buy their games. And I think it would decrease piracy. Because I think some of the people pirating it's because they don't get to try the game. But that's just my thoughts. Next, I want to talk about Final Fantasy. So with modern video games, it's pretty standard for a day one patch of some sort. Even like most indie games will usually have you install a day one patch. It's just more and more common. You buy a game. Not the entire game is on the disc. You're going to have to put a patch in so they can fix last minute glitches or graphic issues or whatever else might need to be fixed at the last minute. So that's why it's particularly interesting that Final Fantasy 16 won't have a day one patch for folks with the internet. Or folks with internet, for that matter. This comes from Game Informer. They did an interview with the creators. According to them, Final Fantasy 16 is a finished package you'll download without having to make space for a massive first installation update. The director told the publication this is for 2 reasons. The first is that the development team has total faith in the stability of the game's final build, and secondly, and more crucially, that not everyone has an internet connection, which complicates the nature of downloading a day one patch. Which is odd coming from the person who directed Final Fantasy XIV, but sure. They just want to make sure the game is entirely functional at launch. And I gotta say, I kind of wish more companies would do this. Now, there's a chance there will still be patches eventually. There's almost always stuff found over time. But it's kind of ballsy. Like, just saying, hey, no, we're confident our game is good. Like, that is something. That is, in the day and age where most games have some glitches and issues when they first release, even after day one patches. It is a interesting thing to say. I find it particularly interesting from Square Enix, which has definitely had issues with this sort of thing here recently. I know they don't usually have as many issues with their RPGs. So, hopefully, the game launches and is perfectly fine. Final Fantasy is not a series I find particularly interesting. It's definitely not a series for me. But I do hope for the people that do enjoy Final Fantasy that the game functions well at release. Now, I do have something else I'd like to talk about, and so let's get right to that. So, video game developers are starting to have an issue, and this is not just one particular developer; it's all of them, really. Any developer that makes sequels is starting to have an issue. It seems like anytime a game trailer or gameplay is shown for a game that is a sequel, one of the big complaints is that it just looks too much like the first game. God of War Ragnarok, when they first showed gameplay, a lot of people complained, "Oh, this just looks like more God of War." Spider-Man 2, when they showed gameplay for Spider-Man 2, people are now just saying, "Oh, this just looks more like Spider-Man, like the previous game." Like, it is pretty much the major complaint anytime a studio releases a sequel to a game from the last 5 or 6 years or so. People just start saying, "Hey, this just looks like it's more of that whatever," and I don't think this is a good mindset. It's just not a good mindset. Because if you enjoyed something, like, why wouldn't you want more of that? Would you expect them to change Spider-Man, for example, to be like massively different from the first one? Like, why would you want that? The first one was good. Same with God of War, a series which is not for me. Why would you want them to change the formula from the first game if you enjoyed it so much? So I kind of don't get it, but it's definitely becoming more and more of a thing, and it seems to be affecting how developers design their sequels. Jeff Grubb was reporting before God of War Ragnarok came out that the next game would probably be outside that series, or at least I think he was. I think I read that somewhere. But then eventually it was confirmed by the series, like by the director or whatever, that the next God of War game would be a fresh start. It would be like a new take on God of War. After just 2 games in the Norse duo, they were not going to make that game a trilogy. They're just going to go on to something else. And so, like, I'm not sure what else there is to say here. I just think it's just an issue I wanted to bring to people's attention, because, like, it's kind of dumb. Like, I enjoyed the first Spider-Man game. The first Spider-Man game is one of my favorite games. In fact, one of my issues with Miles Morales, it was not close enough to resembling that first Spider-Man game. And so, when people are complaining, "Oh, this resembles the first game too much," that's just kind of a weird complaint to have if you enjoyed it. I don't know what people are expecting from game sequels. This isn't something you hear about movie sequels per se. When you see a movie trailer, you don't hear people complaining, "Oh, this is too much like the first one." This only seems to be an issue with video games, and it's just kind of a weird issue that for people to have. And I just wanted that to be known. But and I want to emphasize this, but it's time for a quick break. I'll be back in just a few seconds even. So I know last week I said I was going to try to keep playing Guardians of the Galaxy, and I have to admit I failed. I didn't play any Guardians of the Galaxy because I was too busy playing Star Trek Resurgence. So I'm going to talk about Star Trek Resurgence, and then I'll talk about Guardians of the Galaxy eventually. I'm gonna finish it eventually, but I'm going to talk about Star Trek Resurgence. As a Star Trek fan, I've been really, really enjoying this game. but as a video gamer, I've been slightly disappointed. It is an awesome Star Trek game with great storytelling and great storytelling methods that makes you feel like you're participating in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Unfortunately, it's a pretty average video game full of technical glitches that seem to take place at the worst possible times most of the time. Graphically, the game is fine. It's not particularly impressive, but it's not bad looking either. It's exactly what I expect out of an indie game like this. Frame rate's fine. It's a locked 30 FPS, which I know some people are like, oh, if it's not 60, it's bad. But you gotta remember, this is an indie game. It's technically not even a PS5 or a Xbox Series game. You're playing it through backwards compatibility. It'd be nice if they had the option to unlock the frame rate on PC, but for the most part, I mean, it's a Telltale game. It doesn't really matter that much. The sound is where I have a bit of an issue. The voice acting is good, music's fine. However, the sound is where I've noticed the most glitches. It glitches in and out, repeats sometimes when it's supposed to be saying something else, which in this type of game can make it difficult to follow elements of the story. This is particularly irritating given that it's a Telltale game. I mean, the story is like the entire point of the game. It doesn't happen super often, but it happens enough to be noticeable, maybe once every few chapters. I've also noticed a few graphical glitches. The game is just not well optimized and not well polished, which is disappointing because the story is very good and the characters are enjoyable. If you've played a Telltale game before, this should be quite familiar to you, as that's where the developers mostly used to work, most of the developers at least. However, while I personally had no trouble getting into Telltale, I personally did have trouble getting into Telltale games like Batman and The Walking Dead, I had no issues getting into Star Trek Resurgence. Typically, Telltale games aren't really for me, but Star Trek Resurgence really does get it right. The story was good. I know I've said that several times. I can't say it enough. The story is really good. It's engaging, kept me wanting to keep playing, find out more about what was going on. The characters are well developed, with interesting relationships and dynamics. I think any fan of Star Trek will really enjoy this game, and I did find myself losing track of time as I played, as the game had me hooked. As far as gameplay goes, I really only have one complaint, and that's the use of the R2 trigger as the primary button for selecting things when exploring. It seems like a bit of an odd choice, and it doesn't make it clear that's the button to use for that at any point in the game. You just kind of have to figure it out. Given that literally no other game does this, a prompt to let you know would have been appreciated. There's also been a few other times where it made you use a button for something. It just felt like weird button placement, weird button mapping. All in all, I'm just slightly disappointed. There is the makings of a very good game here. And I think if they delayed it a few months, they could have polished it into something really special that Star Trek fans would consider to be essential to the franchise. It's sad that it came out a little bit glitchy, with odd controls, constant bugs, and so on. The story, like I said, is very good, and I think most big fans of Star Trek like myself would be willing to power through to enjoy what's there. But the more casual Star Trek fans who also enjoy video games will probably want to skip this one, at least for now. Perhaps in the future there will be patches that can help fix this game and really make it great. But until then, it's got the makings of something great, held back by a lack of polish. And that's really my thoughts on Star Trek Resurgence. But now I want to talk about something else. So, Embracer Group is in trouble. Or at least slightly in trouble. For those who don't know, Embracer Group is this, quite frankly, giant video game company. They're although they're almost more like an investor firm, kind of. It's difficult to explain exactly what they do, but they mostly own other video game companies. So there's like 30 or 40 different companies that are all owned by Embracer Group, and they all do their own thing and have access to all these different IPs. Recently, they bought a bunch of studios from Square Enix, and I think that's where a lot of this trouble comes down to. Not the studios they bought from Square Enix specifically, but they've been on a pretty big buying spree the last decade or so, really. The market was good for them, and so they kept buying studios. And it didn't seem like they had any actual goal or strategy. I just assumed they wanted to release a lot of good video games. Embracer Group is the same company that has like a big video game library. So I just assumed personally that, hey, as a company, they care about video games and they just want to release video games. They want to make money off of video games, and that's been their strategy. But it looks like they maybe didn't really have a strategy. Or if they did, it's fallen through. It might have been to own all these different IPs to get on streaming services. Who knows? But their financials, they had a financial like outlook thing here recently. Didn't look good. And they also announced that they lost one major strategic partnership that had been negotiated for seven months and will not materialize. So what could that be? I personally think it was a Xbox Game Pass deal to get all the Embracer Group games on Game Pass. I think Microsoft would probably want the Embracer Group games. I think it would make sense why they would have been talking. And I think maybe Embracer was asking for too much, which is weird because they also made a deal with Amazon when it comes to Tomb Raider, and they like practically made their money back already on buying that. So something weird is going on at Embracer Group. Their finances weren't looking good. Hopefully they'll bounce back from it. I think there's a lot of potential there. They own a lot of IPs that I care about. I keep mentioning Tomb Raider, but they also have Time Splitters, which they've been working on a Time Splitters game forever now. I was hoping we might hear about that this year. So they also own like a bunch of stuff. They own Aspire, which makes a bunch of Star Wars stuff. I really like the stuff Aspire has released, mostly ports. And just like I've liked a lot of this stuff Embracer Group has released here recently. And so it's kind of disappointing to see that they're not doing so well financially. But hopefully they'll bounce back. Hopefully they'll be good. But I do have something else I want to talk about. Specifically, Nintendo Directs. So first off, I'm getting this news story from GoNintendo.com. I just went there because that's like where it was easiest to get this information. They're not the original people reporting. According to Ethan Gach of Kotaku, he didn't actually post an article, but he tweeted it. Nintendo is planning on having a, quote, digital showcase, unquote, sometime this year. While the this year portion is a little vague with how close it is to E3 season, it seems likely that we could get a presentation pretty soon. This could be backed up by the second part of his tweet, which says to expect more news from him in coming weeks and months. So, this mostly isn't news. Of course, there's going to be a Nintendo digital showcase of some sort. They have indie worlds, they have directs, they have directs minis, they have third-party showcases. Really, this is just an excuse to talk about what's going on at Nintendo this summer, because we think there has to be something. Nintendo, they are having their big event, their big physical event this year, where they're doing like a Nintendo Live, I think it's called, and they'll have people come out and demo their games. But usually when they have this type of thing, it's new games that aren't out yet, or games that just released. But Nintendo hasn't announced anything for the second part of this year. We know Pikmin's coming out in like July, and we know nothing after that. So if they don't announce some new games, they're not going to have anything to show off on Nintendo Live. So we know they got to announce some new games. The question is when and where. They can't wait till fall. Though I'm sure they'll have a September Direct. They always have a September Direct. But they can't wait that long because Nintendo Live is before that. A Direct seems likely, except it was reported earlier this year, Nintendo's back half of the year doesn't have a whole lot going on. And they also were one of the first ones to skip E3 because it, like, quote, it didn't fit their schedule or whatever. I don't remember exactly how they worded it. So something weird's going on at Nintendo. Now, here's my theory. They've always done 3 Directs each year. There's a February, March Direct, which makes sense because you got to announce your games for the summer. Summer is a big time for gaming. Kids are out of school. Teachers are out of school. People are sometimes off work. Big time for gaming. Makes sense that they want you to know what games you'll be playing that summer. A September Direct also makes sense. It's right before the holidays. Let them talk about their holiday titles. Of their Directs, the summer one is always the one that has made the least sense. It's been their biggest showcase because of E3. But it doesn't necessarily make sense on the timing. Fall is not like a particularly big time for gaming outside of holiday releases, which, like I said, they usually talk about in September. So I did being so close to that September Direct, because let's face it, E3 Direct is usually in June. You have July, August, September. There really isn't a need for a summer Direct for them. There never technically has been. So I think going down to 2 Directs makes sense. But with Nintendo Live, clearly they have to announce something. I think we could get a third-party showcase. I know that doesn't entirely make sense with Nintendo Live, but maybe they're putting on this event to show off third-party games. I know that would be a little bit surprising, but it's not completely unlike Nintendo. They do that sort of thing on occasion. So that's my theory personally. I think we're going to get a third-party showcase. But who knows? Maybe we'll get a Direct Mini. Maybe they will still have a Direct. I'm not sure why they pulled out of E3 if they were going to have a Direct. Who knows? But actually, we do know it. It was reported that E3 they weren't planning soon enough, and so maybe that's just what happened there. Still, it's a pretty weird situation. I'm glad this got reported this week. It'll be interesting to see what Nintendo does in the next year or so, especially since we know most likely they're going to release a new console. So they're kind of in a weird place right now, and it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that. So thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. This is the end of the podcast, the end of the show. I'll be back next week. If you are listening on YouTube, once again, make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell, comment, like the video, but comment. I'd love to hear what you have to say on any of this. I would love to get some conversations going. In fact, if I can get enough people listening to this podcast across all platforms, eventually I'd like to start a Discord server for the podcast so we can just kind of discuss these sorts of things. But for now, just comment on the video if you're listening on YouTube. Tell me your thoughts on anything discussed today. If you're listening on a different podcasting platform, hopefully they have a follow or subscribe button of some sort. I think you could subscribe to the RSS feed. I hope. If not, just come back next week. It'll probably be another episode. It's a busy time of year for video games. Summer Game Fest is coming up. Several different presentations from Xbox, Ubisoft, Devolver Digital, etc. are coming up. We're only like a week and a half away, 2 weeks, something like that. So hopefully next week I'll be back with news. I should be back next week with news. Hopefully there'll be plenty of news to talk about. Until then, stay safe out there. Play lots of video games. Anyone who's off for the summer, I hope you enjoy your summer. And I will be back next week. See you then.